Hello and welcome to the 30 Days of Kuriboh, my celebration of the Kuriboh over the Christmas period. We'll start with the original. Its effect is, during damage calculation, if your opponent's monster attacks, as a quick effect you can discard this card. You take no battle damage from that battle. It zeroes out any battle damage that you take, which is fine depending on what your opponent is running. If they've got a particularly beat down style of deck, then that can actually save you from losing in that turn. It might seem incredibly weak for what it is, but actually at least it has an effect, and it's the first iteration of what would be classified as a hand trap. Even if it doesn't do really anything to your opponent, it just affects itself. It is a dark attribute and a fiend type, a level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense, and it was most commonly used by Yugioh, who consider it to be very useful, and against Seto Kaiba it was seen as a massive nuisance. Hello and welcome to day 2 of the countdown to Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Wing Kuriboh. It's a light attribute fairy type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. Its effect, if this card on the field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, for the rest of this turn you take no battle damage. This was famously given to Yugioh, the main character in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, by Yugi Moto himself. There is an argument that Yugi might have sounded like Yami, but that's all because he's grown up and his voice is broken. It's a loyal card that Jaden has always used. It has a transformed version as well, both the level 9 and the level 10 versions. Level 10 was actually shown within episode 4. The other version I don't believe has had an anime appearance, but it has always been Jaden's go-to protection monster, even from the likes of the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, where Professor Velian Crowler attacked using Ancient Gear Golem into Wing Kuriboh. He took no damage. Technically that's a false ruling, because it hadn't been sent to the graveyard when that did the piercing effect damage. It should have actually have inflicted and defeated Jaden then, but you know, anime logic and all that. Hello and welcome to day 3 of the countdown to Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Wing Kuriboh level 9. It's a light attribute fairy type level 9 monster with question mark attack and question mark defense. And its effect is, activate only as chain link 3 or higher as a quick effect. You can special summon this card from your hand. Spell cards that have been activated are banished instead of being sent to the graveyard. The attack and defense of this card are each equal to the number of spells in your opponent's graveyard times 500. You can only control one Winged Kuriboh level 9. So this is quite an unusual effect for any monster. Chainlink 3 or higher means that you or your opponent has to have activated a couple of cards pretty much at the same time, and this would have to be activated as a response. It's fine because it can just instantly special summon itself, and actually you can bring it out normally by tribute summoning. It's just much faster this way. Any spell cards that are activated are banished instead of being sent to the graveyard. Actually, this is a negative effect. Whilst it does make it more difficult for your opponent to then recover any of their spell cards, because banishing something is usually a little bit more difficult, especially with back row cards, it's not helpful for the boosting effect that it gets for the number of spells in the opponent's graveyard. Had it been that those cards couldn't be recovered from the graveyard and are just left in the graveyard, then I would argue that this is actually progressively becoming more powerful, but it's just a little bit forgettable and it's a bit too conditional to be competitive. Hello and welcome to the countdown to Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Wing Kuriboh level 10. It's light attribute fairy type level 10 monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. And its effect is, cannot be normal summoned or set, it must be special summoned with transcendent wings. During your opponent's battle phase, as a quick effect, you contribute this face-up card, destroy as many attack position monsters your opponent controls as possible, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the combined original attack of those destroyed monsters. This is a very high risk, high reward type of monster. Yes, it does make it a level 10 for a Wing Kuriboh, which you don't really see. I think there is actually a pendulum version which is also a level 8, but arguably you don't really have high level Kuriboh monsters. Transcendent Wings is the card which is a quick play. It requires you to discard 2 cards from your hand. That's a nuisance because technically you're going -3. It is very effective for what it does, because if your opponent has various monsters on their field in attack position, you could probably finish them off in that one turn. The disadvantage is, to get the burn effect that will finish off your opponent, it has to destroy those monsters. So if they've got immunity from any of these effects, this means that those monsters will no longer trigger their effects to burn your opponent. So the ones that can be destroyed will, the ones that can't won't. Hello and welcome to day 5 of Kuriboh. Today we're covering Kuri Bandit, a dark attribute fiend type level 3 with 1000 attack and 700 defense. During the end phase, if this card was normal summoned this turn, you contribute this card, excavate the top 5 cards of your deck. You can add 1 excavated spell or trap card to your hand, also send the remaining cards to the graveyard. This card is very useful for what it does. For starters, you are able to search for a number of your different spell or trap cards based on the 5 cards that you've drawn into. Of course, you do have to get rid of the other cards, but then again, they might be more useful in the graveyard. The other thing is, it does let you directly add that card to your hand instead of having to wait or use any sort of searching. The problem is, because it is during the end phase, that means this card has to be normal summoned on the turn. It has to get rid of itself. That means that could leave you quite defenseless. And the fact is, if it's a trap card, you can't even set it until your next turn, so it might be unuseful at the point you use it, or your opponent might have been able to get rid of it before you ever have that opportunity. Hello and welcome to day 6 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's a dark attribute fiend type effect monster level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, this card is always treated as a Kuriboh card. When this card or another Kuriboh monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can special summon 1 monster with 300 attack or 200 defense from your deck, except Kuriboh. You can only use this effect of Kuriboh once per turn. You contribute this card you control and 1 each of Kuriboh, 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 and Kuriboh from your hand and or field. Special summon 1 Kuriboh from your hand, deck, or graveyard. We've already covered Kuriboh, so that is a very powerful monster. It does have the ability to strengthen itself. It does, for this card, be able to replace itself with another one of the Kuriboh monsters. If it's destroyed in battle, it would have been nice if it had been by a card effect as well, but I suppose you can't have everything. The other thing is it does meet the condition just to bring out the Kuriboh, and you do have to get rid of a number of cards from your hand and or field, so it's a combination of both. It's not so limited as to be purely field or purely hand, but this is nothing that's going to surprise your opponent, and therefore I question whether it's actually that useful. Hello and welcome to day 7 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's a dark attribute fiend type level 5 with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. Its effect, gains 300 attack and defense for each Kuriboh monster you control and in your graveyard. You can only use 1 of the following effects of Kuriboh per turn and only once that turn. If you have more monsters in your graveyard than your opponent, you can special summon this card from your hand. Or during your main or battle phase, you can return this card to the hand, and if you do, special summon 5 monsters, 1 Kuriboh, 1 Kuriboh, 1 Kuriboh, 1 Kuriboh, and 1 Kuriboh from your hand and or graveyard in attack position. The great thing about this card is it's not limited to the types of Kuriboh monsters you have, and they can be both what you control on the field and in your graveyard. So for example, if you had 3 exact Kuribohs, they would still boost this card up by 300 attack points for each. Considering you've got 5 monsters there, you can actually make this a 6000 attack monster at its highest, if you really want to look at it that way. Realistically, you're not going to get that, but you might get it doubled, maybe slightly more than 3000 if you're lucky. I mean, even just to bring this card out, you are going to really want to have those in your graveyard. And there is so much support with the other Kuriboh monsters, especially the Kuriboh brothers, which the 5 you see there are depicted as. They were used by Yugioh within the series. It was used against those who were controlled by darts and the Seal of Orichalcos, and it was very much relied on for its effect, even though I believe Yugioh lost that duel to Raphael. The other part is it does have its recovery effect, where it can either split itself up, or you can actually just special summon this card from your hand without any real restrictions. Hello and welcome to day 8 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's a dark attribute fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can discard this card. then target one monster in either graveyard except this card, special summon it to the field, but send it to the graveyard during the end phase. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can add one Monster Reborn from your deck or graveyard to your hand during the end phase of this turn. You can only use each effect of Kuriboh once per turn. So the good thing about this card is this responds to one of your opponent's attacks. It doesn't have to be a direct attack, it can just be a standardized attack. By discarding this, you're just able to Monster Reborn one of your or your opponent's monsters, but it is sent to the graveyard during the end phase. I would recommend that it's best used against when your opponent's trying to attack you directly, because even if your monster just lasts the turn, or even if it doesn't, even if it's just a weak monster, so long as your opponent doesn't have anything that pierces in battle damage, you protect yourself from that one attack, and it can make the difference between living that turn and drawing into something good, which you can counteract your opponent for during your following turn. The fact that this card can also search for a Monster Reborn is actually quite scary. You don't really have dedicated spell or traps like this beyond archetypal aspects, but for the Monster Reborn to have its own Kuriboh version is a great idea. Hello and welcome to day 9 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Astral Kuriboh. It's a light attribute fiend type level 1 with 100 attack and 100 defense. You can reveal one number exceeds monster in your extra deck, special summon this card from your hand. If you do, this card's level becomes the revealed monster's rank. Also, whilst it is face up in the monster zone, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck except number exceeds monsters. You can only use this effect of Astral Kuriboh once per turn. A number exceeds monster that was summoned using this card on the field as material gains this effect. It cannot be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effects. This card is amazing as a Kuriboh monster. For starters, I know it does just look like Rainbow Kuriboh, and I think it's supposed to be mildly based off it. It's fine because it's part of the Zeal archetype, and it pairs very well with Yu Masukumo's deck. He uses a lot of different number monsters. It reduces the number of requirements you have for some of the more difficult Exceeds monsters. For example, the ones that are rank 7s or rank 9s or beyond. So you've got number 9 Dyson Sphere is a bit of a nuisance. It can make itself treated as a level 9 monster, and then all you need is another level 9 to actually exceed summon into number 9 Dyson Sphere, for example. And it doesn't even stop there. The monsters that are summoned through this effect cannot be destroyed by battle or your opponent's card effects. That provides them with a very specific amount of immunity. Pair this with things such as Safe Zone or other cards, and you can actually protect your monster more thoroughly, and I'm sure you can get to a point where you've got perfect protection from everything. If you were to pair this, for example, with Dyson Sphere can also negate attacks, so even your opponents, when they try and go into your monsters, will be shut down through this effect. Same aspect can be used with Utopia. Hello and welcome to day 10 of Kuriboh. We're looking at Clear Kuriboh. This is a light attribute fairy type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. And its effect is, during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a monster effect that would inflict damage, you can discard this card, negate the activation. When an opponent monster declares a direct attack, you can banish this card from your graveyard, draw one card. If it is a monster, you can special summon it, then change the attack target to it. You can only use the effect of Clear Kuriboh once per turn. So the good points of this card is, firstly, it can zero out monster effect damage. So if it's just effect burn damage, you can actually prevent you from taking significant points. Although I can't think of anything that is that specific that will do instant amounts of damage from a monster. You get to discard this card as well to negate that. Also, when your opponent declares a direct attack, by just banishing this card, you get to draw a card. If it happens to be a monster, you can use it basically as a new shield. If it happens to be a very high attack and defense monster, then actually you're able to not only protect your life points, but actually be able to be on the offense during the next turn. Disadvantages of this card include, the problem is it's just for monster effect burn damage. It's not spell or trap cards, so that's only 1/3 covered. The other issue is this has to be in the graveyard already to prevent, and it has to be a direct attack. It can't just be an attack on one of your other monsters. The last bit is, if it happens to not be a monster, okay, you've drawn that card, but you can't use it. it's no worth having it if your opponent ends up defeating you within that same turn. Hello and welcome to day 11 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Junk Kuriboh. It's a Earth attribute machine type monster. It's a level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect: during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that would inflict damage to you, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. This is kind of the opposite of Kuriboh, whereas that zeroes out battle damage. This cancels out the effect damage of a card. Depending on what that card is, that can make the difference. If it's just a standardized spell or trap card that only has one use to it, then it's not really going to do much. You're just pitching a card to protect yourself for once, and it's always going to be treated as a, even if it's not a minus, it's still not doing you very much good. The other thing is, if it happens to be a high resourced monster, actually that's quite useful. This came about the time of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D's era. As you can tell, because it's a junk monster, it's a junk version of Kuriboh. That's the whole purpose of it. And it's fine, but it's very niche and will come up in very few situations. Hello and welcome to day 12 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect: this card is always treated as a Kuriboh card. When this card or another Kuriboh monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can add one spell or trap card from your deck to your hand that lists the card Kuriboh in its text. You can only use this effect of Kuriboh once per turn. Once per turn, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, while you control another Kuriboh monster, you can change the attack of all other monsters you control to 0 until the end of this turn, and if you do, negate that attack. So this is another one of those Brothers of Legend cards that came out. It's a very recent drop, and it's another version of Kuriboh. This one has the ability, when it's destroyed by battle, just to search for a specific spell or trap card that lists Kuriboh. So you've got things like Flute of Summoning Kuriboh, you've got Detonate, you have Multiply, just to give you a couple of examples there. Each of those are useful in their own ways, but it's just about balancing what you need for the current state of the game. The other thing is, this can stop your opponent's monster's attack, but it does sacrifice all of your Kuriboh's attack to become 0. So basically, any of their other monsters, it's essentially the same as attacking directly. Whilst it's quite useful if you do have other Kuriboh monsters to trigger that effect, it's reliant on that, which is a downside of it. It's fine as an overall strategy if you've got lots of different spell or trap cards to protect your monsters, or you've got things like the Dark Door, which actually limits attacks to 1 attack per turn, if you're running some kind of very strange strategy. But other than that, it's not dependable. You do need to have other forms of protection beyond just this card. Hello and welcome to day 13 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's a level 1 Dark Attribute Fiend type monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. This card is always treated as a Kuriboh card. As a quick effect, you can discard this card, then target one Kuriboh monster you control. It gains 1500 attack. You contribute this card you control and one each of Kuriboh, Kuriboh, and Kuriboh from your hand and or field. Add one Kuribandit from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one Fiend type monster from your hand. The nice thing about this card is it does give your Kuriboh monsters additional attack points, 1500, which is nothing to sneeze at. It does mean your Kuriboh becomes a 1800 attack level 1 monster, and I can't remember for the life of me if there are that many level 1 monsters that can actually reach that through their own effects. By attributing this alongside the other monsters from both the hand and the field, you're able to get your Kuribandit and search that to your hand. And of course, with its effect, you're then able to search for spell or trap cards at the end phase by attributing it. Of course, the additional normal summon means that you can actually summon your Kuribandit immediately after searching it. Or if you're running a pure Fiend type deck, you could be, summoning another Kuriboh monster or something alternative to meet the same kind of conditions of how your deck plans on running. These are the best things about the card. I wouldn't really say there is too much downside beyond the scope of you need 5 specific named Kuriboh monsters in order to trigger its secondary ability. Hello and welcome to day 14 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. This is a light attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, at the end of the battle phase, you can discard this card, then target one monster in your graveyard that was destroyed by battle and sent there this turn, special summon it. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target any number of Kuriboh monsters in your graveyard, special summon them. This card is universally, I would say, one of the best Kuriboh style cards you've got. The others are very reliant on each other. This is not reliant on anything. It can be run generally within any style of deck, provided you've got monsters that need to be revived when they've been destroyed by battle. There you go. That's the condition for just running this card. By doing that, you're able to constantly revive your monsters. It's a bit like activating the trap card Time Machine, but as it happens to be from your hand. And the thing is, okay, you are having to discard this, but you're getting a much more powerful, in all likelihood, monster as a trade-off. The other thing is, when the opponent declares an attack, by just banishing this card, you can bring out any number of Kuriboh monsters you've got. So the longer the duel has gone on for, the more likely you are to be able to access more monsters. There isn't really any downside other than that it's tailored to a Kuriboh style deck. I would argue that's the least number of problems you've got. Hello and welcome to day 15 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. This is a dark attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, this card is always treated as a Kuriboh card. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can discard this card, add one Kuriboh monster from your deck to your hand, except Kuriboh. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can discard one trap, then target one face-up monster your opponent controls. It loses 1500 attack until the end of this turn. So this is very much acting like the opposite of the other monster, whereas that boosts your monsters by 1500, this decreases your opponent's monsters by 1500. If you can manage to use both effects in the same turn, 3000 point difference will definitely make it under this card. Oh well, I can pretty much guarantee most cards won't be beyond the 3000 threshold. The other thing is, it is able to then search for any of your Kuriboh style monsters, so whereas another card searches for your spell traps, this goes for the monsters as well. The only downside I would argue is that it requires a discard of a trap card rather than just generically, which means it's a bit more conditional than the alternative version. Hello and welcome to day 16 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Link Kuriboh. It's a dark attribute Cyverse Turk Link monster with a bottom link arrow, 300 attack, and it's a link 1. It requires one level 1 monster. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you contribute this card, change that opponent's monster's attack to 0 until the end of this turn. If this card is in your graveyard as a quick effect, you contribute one level 1 monster, special summon this card. You can only use this effect of Link Kuriboh once per turn. So the whole point of this card is, by attributing this card, you can stop one of your opponent's attacks because they just changed to 0, which means they're not going to crash into one of your monsters unless they need that monster in the graveyard. This also has a graveyard effect. Just by attributing a level 1 monster, you're able to just bring this card out. It might not seem that good, but considering that you can then go into further link monsters, or even just reoccur its first effect, it's basically like negating an attack once per turn. Although, your opponent can choose whether or not to attack, that's the difference. Hello and welcome to day 17 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Magic Kuriboh. It's a dark attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, during the main or battle phase, if you took battle damage or damage from an opponent's card effect this turn, as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, special summon one Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl from your deck or graveyard. If a face-up spellcaster monster you control is destroyed by battle, or an opponent's card effect, you can add this card from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use each effect of Magic Kuriboh once per turn. To my knowledge, this is one of the newest examples of Kuriboh. I think other than the Performer PAL versions, which are the Pendulum monsters, I think this is definitely on that list of being one of the newest. The first effect, just to discard it to, even though it doesn't zero out the damage you take, actually replacing the discard with an initial summon of Dark Magician or Dark Magician Girl, means that you've already got a very powerful monster on your field. The other thing is, if those monsters ever happen to be destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, it just has to be, it doesn't have to be limited to that, but that's just an example. You just recover this card and then you can just go through the whole cycle of doing things again. Because the way your opponent is going to have to beat you is either through life point loss, so that's the easiest ways are through battle or card effects. You can go through alternative win conditions like Yugioh, Final Countdown, Deck Out, but in most cases you're going to be able to reoccur this effect. Hello and welcome to day 18 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Performer Pal Barra Kuriboh. This is a Dark Attribute Fiend type Pendulum monster. It's a level 8 with a Pendulum scale of 1, 300 attack and 3000 defense. The Pendulum effect, once per turn at the start of the battle phase, you can add one monster with 300 attack and 200 defense from your deck to your hand, then destroy this card. The monster effect, when your monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon this card from your hand. Your opponent's monsters cannot target any other monsters for attacks. If this card is attacked, change it to attack position at the end of the damage step. This is one of the two Pendulum monsters which I've previously mentioned. It's pretty much the newest support that's come out. It being a level 8, I don't think you've got any examples of that. You've got the level 9 version and the level 10, so this is a first. It's also very bulky. It might only have 300 attack, but 3000 defense is not anything to sneeze at. The Pendulum effect, actually by just destroying this card, it does have to be at the start of the battle phase, so you can't really go offensive with this strategy, but it lets you search for any of your Kuriboh monsters or anything that happens to meet the 300 attack, 200 defense requirement. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. If you can, leave those in the comments down below. Obviously from the monster effect as well, you can actually trigger it from your hand. When your monster is destroyed by battle, you just get to instantly special summon this card. It's going to be in defense mode. Your opponent is then having to get rid of this before they get rid of any of your other cards. And frankly, if you're trying to protect other cards, this is always a good option. The biggest problem of this is after the end of the damage step, this would get changed to attack position. So it's very much like Big Shield Gardener. Once it's been attacked once, it's forced into attack mode, and unless you can protect it for the rest of the turn, then unfortunately you are going to lose significant life points after that. But at least it gives you one or two forms of protection. Hello and welcome to day 19 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Performer Pal Classic Kuriboh. This is a Dark Attribute Fiend type Pendulum monster with a level of 1 and a Pendulum scale of 8. It has 300 attack and 200 defense. The Pendulum effect, when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, destroy this card. The monster effect, if this card is destroyed by its own Pendulum effect, end the battle phase. You can only use each of the following effects of Performer Pal Classic Kuriboh once per turn. You can discard this card, then target one card in your Pendulum zone. Its Pendulum scale becomes 1 until the end of this turn. When you take battle damage while this card is in your graveyard, you can place this card in your Pendulum zone. The purpose of this card really, it doesn't really have much of a Pendulum effect, it just kind of self-destructs when your opponent attacks using a direct attack. Although it does end the battle phase, so that means that you're taking no more damage within that turn. If you happen to be on low life points and your opponent has multiple monsters on the field, maybe that would be a good thing. The other thing about this effect is you then have to discard this card to target a Pendulum monster to adapt its scale to 1. That's fine if you need multiple different types of scales and you need more of a variety in between to be able to special summon through Pendulum summoning. The other thing is when you take battle damage while this card is in the graveyard, you're then able to recover it to the Pendulum zone, so it's got one of those recursion effects. It's not as impressive as the other Performer Pal monster, but I didn't expect it to be either. Hello and welcome to day 20 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Performer Pal Kuriboh. This is a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. When an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if you do, change the attack target to this card and proceed to damage calculation. If you take battle damage from that battle, you gain that much life points instead. The purpose of this card is it basically lets you add life points by special summoning this card, some kind of battle negation, even if it just has to happen from the hand. It's a decent effect because rather than it going for a direct attack and potentially threatening your life points, you're actually able to pad out your life points before your opponent's able to do anything. It's very much like how Nutrient Z works. you gain 4,000 life points if your opponent is direct attacking with 2,000 or more, I believe. So you're, in most cases, going to gain more life points than you'll lose. Very much the same with this. Hello and welcome to day 21 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Rainbow Kuriboh. This is a light attribute fiend type level 1 with 100 attack and 100 defense. Its effect is you can only use each effect of Rainbow Kuriboh once per turn. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can target that attacking monster, equip this card from your hand to that monster. It cannot attack. And when an opponent's monster declares a direct attack, while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. This is also a very powerful, and it has been used relatively competitively in terms of all the Kuriboh monsters that exist. For starters, when the opponent declares an attack, you can just equip this card from the hand. The opponent doesn't know what you're running, so they wouldn't expect that. If it's on one of the most powerful monsters that are very resource heavy, then you've essentially stopped them from doing anything with that monster for the duration, provided that it doesn't have any powerful effects that can actually rid this card. The other thing is, this can actually special summon itself from the graveyard, but it does get banished. It will protect you from a direct attack though, which means you can live until your next turn and hopefully draw into something more favourable. Hello and welcome to day 22 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Real Kuriboh, which is a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. Its effect is if this card is tributed, draw one card. If your monster would be destroyed by battle, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. So actually this is very good if you're using it for one of your Monarch decks or something along those lines, because the card you're tributing you just draw to replace, so you're not actually minusing yourself. The other thing is, if any of your monsters happen to be threatened with destruction in battle, you're just simply removing this as the cost. That means hopefully on your next turn you're able to cycle through something and then trigger off its effect to then protect your other monsters. It's also very useful because tributes are classified from ritual summoning, so it can actually, this is why it's called Relin Kuriboh, so it's, the example is basically with relinquished. Hello and welcome to day 23 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Spear Kuriboh. It's a Dark Attribute Fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. And its effect is when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard, change the attacking monster to defense position. When you ritual summon, you can banish this card from your graveyard as one of the monsters required for the ritual summon. So the first thing is it can actually stop your opponent's monster from attacking, because it switches it from attack to defense position. Unless your opponent has anything that can actually switch your opponent's monsters back into attack position, they won't be attacking for that turn. It's a bit like a one-off negation of a monster attack. The ritual element of it, just to be able to use it as part of the cost, it's fine, but considering it's only a level 1, you are going to need at least 1 or 2 monsters to then meet the other conditions of ritual summoning a decent ritual monster. Hello and welcome to day 24 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at this skilled Chestnut Magician. It's a Dark Attribute Spellcaster type level 4 monster with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect, each time a spell card is activated, place one spell counter on this card. When that spell resolves, maximum 3. You can remove one spell counter from this card, then activate one of these effects. 1. Increase this card's level by 1, also it gains 1500 attack, or add 1 Kuriboh monster, or multiply it from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can only use this effect of Skilled Chestnut Magician once per turn. Like all of the other skilled magicians, it does benefit from the spell counter generations. So you've got, for example, Skilled Dark Magician, which helps you to then special summon Dark Magician. And you've got various other ones. There's an Archfiend one, there's a Gaia one, I'm sure there's a Red Eyes one soon, or something like that. And there is definitely a Buster Blader one. It just does the same for the Kuribohs. It helps to generate use of its effect to be able to search for a Kuriboh or a Multiply. I don't know why Multiply, considering that it's only letting you search for Kuriboh monsters, not the spell or trap cards, which I think would be just more flexible for it. The other thing is you can actually increase this card's level by 1 and increase its attack points by 1500. If you can do this multiple times, you can boost this card up very significantly without your opponent really realizing it. The level increase is not bad either, because actually if you've got a monster of a certain level and you just need to meet that card's level with this, it's easily done. It might take you 1 or 2 turns to do so, but you're readying yourself, and by keeping a massive threat on the field, this is only a level 4. Every time it goes up, when it gets to level 6, it has 3,300. Which for a level 6 monster is unheard of. You don't really get that too often, especially not from their own effects, maybe from other cards once they've been boosted up enough. But definitely not a card I would sleep on. I do think it's very useful, and I'd love to see decks kind of formulated around this strategy. Hello and welcome to day 25 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at the Flute of Summoning Kuriboh. This is a quick play spell card with the effect target 1 Kuriboh or 1 wing Kuriboh from your deck and either add it to your hand or special summon it. I'm guessing because it targets a Kuriboh that any of the monsters that treat themselves as Kuriboh are also useful fodder for this. So that means being able to either bring them to the hand if they've got hand-based effects, or ones that actually activate whilst on the field is quite useful. It's a generic searcher for the Kuriboh archetype, and the more Kuriboh monsters they keep adding to the archetype, the more powerful this card becomes. I can't wait for the day where we get a very beefy attack, offensive Kuriboh monster beyond the Babylon. I don't even think that card's that credible. I think we need a few other cards, maybe even a couple of extra deck cards. A fusion card would be really nice to see, but we're just waiting on what Konami decides for the future. And you never know. If they're willing to have done something with a lot of the Kuriboh monsters, remember every time they have a brand new season, they have a brand new Kuriboh, or in certain cases they have several different iterations. Look at Yugioh Arc V. They've got 3 different Performer Pal versions, 2 of which have only just been released a number of years after Arc V finished. Same very much for, I think, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal. Kite had a version. I think Yuma had several different Kuriboh monsters. And definitely, it's not something that they're going to forget. Definitely they'll have a Rush Duels version. You wait and see. I think they do have one, but I'm hoping they'll have something a little bit better than just that card. Hello and welcome to day 26 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Berserker Crush. This is a quick play spell card with the effect banish 1 monster from your graveyard, then target 1 wing Kuriboh you control. That target's attack and defense becomes equal to the attack and defense of the monster that was banished until the end of this turn. It's a very specific card for a very specific monster. It has to be a winged Kuriboh, and that means, depending on what you banish, this could make it a very powerful monster. Alternatively, if you've got barely anything in your graveyard and the best thing you've got is, say, an 1800 attack beat stick, it becomes a 2100 attack monster. Not difficult for your opponent to defeat, but, this is one way of making a Kuriboh deck slightly more offensive. It would be nice if they were to update the text to be able to incorporate all the Kuriboh monsters, but you never know, sometimes they do errata things. Typically it's to power down decks, but maybe they'll look towards powering up things as well. Hello and welcome to day 27 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuriboh. It's light attribute fairy type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. Its effect is, during damage calculation, if this card is attacked by your opponent's monster, you can activate this effect. You take no battle damage from that battle, your opponent gains life points equal to the attacking monster's attack, also you return this card to your hand. The good thing about this card is it does protect your life points if you are threatened, but the problem is that it actually keeps generating your opponent's life points. So they're more than welcome to let you continually summon this because they know they're just going to be able to boost themselves up. The more powerful the monster they bring out, the more life points they gain as a part of this effect. This was the companion of Luna in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. I don't believe that Yusei had a dedicated Kuriboh monster, at least not one that kind of guided him. It wasn't like Wing Kuriboh or the original Kuriboh for both Jaden and Yugi respectively. So it was kind of necessary, since it was a cutesy version, to give it to the little girl. She also had an affinity with monster spirits, and since Kuriboh was very much a pathway through the 2 dimensions of both the Dual Monsters world and the regular human world, it was the link necessary to kind of tie everything and the storylines together. There were partial times where Yusei was involved, but for the most part, it didn't really come to much beyond a couple of the anime duels, which paired more towards her relationship between Luna and her brother Leo. Hello and welcome to day 28 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Kuri Photon. This is a light attribute fiend type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. The effect: as a quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to the graveyard and pay 2000 life points. You take no damage this turn. If this card is in your graveyard, you can send one Photon monster from your hand to the graveyard. It's set to Kuri Photon. Add this card from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use this effect of Kuri Photon once per turn. So initially, this card is able to just zero out any damage you take during that turn. Does cost you 2000 life points, but it depends on your situation. If you know you're going to take more damage than the cost you're prepared to make, then it's worth using this effect. Conversely, if it's actually less damage, what's the point of losing the 2000 life points unless you've got specific conditions you want to meet? It's fine as its own standalone card. It can be used as part of any Kuriboh deck, but it's actually more specific to the photons because by sending a photon monster from the hand to the graveyard, you're able to recycle this monster, and this can be continually used for its first effect, so long as you have above 2000 life points. It was used by Kite within Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal. I think it was used against Dr. Faker and probably one or two other duelists, but for the most part he tended to rely heavily on his Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon, and then the various incarnations of that and evolutions, such as Neo Galaxy Eyes Photon Dragon and the Exceased monster. I think it was numbered 62. Hello and welcome to day 29 of Kuriboh. Today we're covering Kuri Volt. This is a light attribute thunder type level 1 with 300 attack and 200 defense. Its effect: you can target one Exceeds monster that has material, detach one material from it, and if you do, special summon one Kuri Volt from your deck. This cannot be used as synchro material. The good thing about this card is it's a direct counter to some of the Exceeds monsters. Some of them cannot use their effects without having materials on them, so by actually detaching the material you can instantly special summon a Kuri Volt, means you're able to go into a rank 1 monster, and there are quite a few out there that are quite decent. You've got number 54 Lionheart, you've got number 13 and 31 subsequently when they interact together, when they're both on the field. You have some odd ones as well. You've got Galaxy Queen, which is quite useless. But I'm sure you've got some rank 1s that you can actually pair very well with this. And it's a good way of just stopping your opponent from having these specific materials attached, especially when you don't have anything that can combat that specific monster without its overlay units. This is one of the examples of the Kuriboh monsters that was used by Yuma Tsukumo. It was famously used against the Dvorak deck. That was against this kid that was in a high school, and he had been bullied very heavily because of his height, and he thought about having very big, very beefy styles of machine to wreck everything, as he described it, and to destroy everything and the level of power it has. And he recognized throughout the duel that actually Dvorak was being ripped apart because it was losing its overlay units because of this card. Hello and welcome to day 30 of Kuriboh. Today we're looking at Link Kuriboh. It's a Dark Attribute Cyverse type Link monster. Its Link arrows at the bottom left, and it's got 300 attack points with a Link rating of 1. It requires a level 4 or lower Cyverse monster to summon it, and when your opponent activates a trap card as a quick effect, you contribute this card, negate that card's effect, and if you do, banish it. If this card is in your graveyard, as a quick effect, you contribute one Atignista monster that was summoned from the extra deck. Special summon this card. You can only use each effect of Link Kuriboh once per turn. So the whole point of this is another of the Link monsters. You've got Link Kuriboh and you've got Ling Kuriboh, which is this card. The summoning requirement is specific to Cyverse types, so it is only useful in those style of decks. But so long as you're running a few of those, then it's not a problem. It is a good counter to various trap cards because it just gets rid of them, and you always have the opportunity to then bring this card back by just getting rid of one of your Atignista extra deck monsters. The only concern I really have with this is it's very specific as opposed to Link Kuriboh, which so long as you're running a level 1 style of deck, you're fine with. This, it's just requiring to deal with only traps, and it's requiring you to run a very specific archetype to rely on.